Well, a very warm welcome to our audience who have joined us today and are connecting in to the webinar called Impacts of Automated Vehicles on Integrated Transport Planning. My name is Rosemary Patterson and I'll be your technical support moderator throughout the session, and my contact details are on the next slide. With me in the studio today is Jerome Carslag, who will moderate the session and feed your questions through to our presenters. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you, Rosemary. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And Jerome manages the NRSPP and its many activities and is co-chair of the ADVI Policy and Risk Group. So for those in our audience who are hearing about ADVI for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about it, Jerome?
So what is ADVI? Well, the key thrust of the Australian and New Zealand Driverless Vehicle Initiative is to build momentum by rapidly exploring the impacts and requirements of this new technology. It's a coalition of governments, industry and academia striving to bring self-driving vehicles safely to the Australian and New Zealand roads.
Fantastic. Can't wait to hear more. Now, the next slide shows that we're looking at around 45 minutes of content with 15 minutes of question. And if anyone has to leave early, there will be a recording available. Our next slide shows that we love to hear from our audience. So if you've got any questions or comments, please type them in and Jerome will read some of them out depending on how much time we have. Now, our two awesome presenters are going to tell us about the transformation challenges and opportunities arising from driverless vehicle technologies in the years ahead. We have Lorraine Duffy, Chief Executive of Parking Australia. Welcome, Lorraine.
Well, welcome, Rosemary, and welcome to everybody that's listening in.
Great to have you here. And Lorraine joined Parking Australia in 2013 after spending some 25 years in leadership roles with the hospitality sector, from the director of the coveted star rating scheme to most recently the CEO of Accommodation Association of Australia. Her position at Parking Australia has, with the empowerment of the board, provided the opportunity to raise the profile and standards of the industry while advocating for change as industry evolves and diversifies. And joining Lorraine is Dr. Jerome Bagan, who is Traffic and Transport Planning Manager of SMEC in the ACT and Southern New South Wales. And welcome, Jerome.
Thank you, Rosemary. Looking forward to the presentation today.
Fantastic. And Jerome is a chartered professional engineer with over 20 years of combined industry and research experience. He currently leads SMEC's Traffic and Transport Planning Group in the ACT and Southern New South Wales, working mostly on traffic engineering and transport planning, providing strategic to detailed advice on short to long-term impacts of the traffic initiatives. And we're starting off with you, Jerome, aren't we? So let's hear what you've got to say. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary, and thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. I'll be talking about the impacts of automated vehicles on integrated transport planning, which is largely based on the ADVI thought leadership paper of the same title. The objective really is to generate discussion and hopefully push governments into action so we could plan for a more likely future transport ecosystem. Now, to give you a bit of a background, the Australian Infrastructure Audit Report, published in 2015, projects the Australian population to grow to 30.5 million by 2031. This consequently increases the cost of congestion in cities to 53.3 billion in the same year. Now, to address the increased demand and the forecasted increase in traffic congestion, there needs to have a greater collaboration in transport planning to ensure that taxpayer investments in transport infrastructure deliver the best returns to the national economy. Now, the basic principle of urban and regional transport planning has remained unchanged for decades, although it has evolved into a more integrated process that takes a larger picture view of transport and mobility. The goal essentially is to make the transport system and the surrounding land use work together. While the car still generally remains the dominant transport mode, integrated transport planning ensures that other modes are also given due consideration. Now, transport planning typically sets short, medium, and long-term planning horizons, and then growth projections in land use are used as a basis for forecasting future transport demand. This demand is then used to determine the required transport initiatives that address issues for each of the included transport modes. The issue with this process is that future transport technology and modes are assumed to be generally the same as they are today. We are essentially only planning for increased demand, increased transport costs, and ways of how to address these issues. We haven't factored in the possible changes in travel patterns and behaviors due to a fundamental change in transport technology, like the introduction of automated or driverless vehicles in the network. Many of you may have already heard about this technology, but the focus is mostly on the technology itself and the benefits that it brings, but not so much on how we plan for this eventuality in the future. Long-term plans and long-term transport investments are being made today that are still based on outdated assumptions about what our future transport network would look like. There's all this talk about automated vehicles, but when will these become commercially available? This article here is saying that 20 car makers will start selling automated cars in the US in less than 5 years. So this was last year, so it's less than 5 years now. This one is about Ford expecting to launch their automated ride-sharing vehicles by 2021. Last year, Singapore started their self-driving trials in a small controlled environment with a company called Nutonomy, and they're aiming for Singapore-wide development by next year. BMW is aiming to have level 5 vehicles by 2021, and Volvo has their Drive Me research project in Sweden this year, where 100 families get to trial Volvo's self-driving vehicles. Here in Australia, the RACF started their Intellibus trials in Perth almost a year ago, and it's been quite successful with over 2,000 people taking part in the trial. And finally, in Sydney, Transport for New South Wales will start their own driverless bus trial sometime this month. Now, these are just a few examples and don't even include forecasts by Japanese car makers and tech companies like Waymo and Uber. I guess what I'm trying to say is that these vehicles will be commercially available in less than 5 years, and they could be commonplace in 10 to 20 years, which easily falls within our medium to long-term planning horizons. So why are we still not considering this technology in our long-term transport plans? These are the current transport modes that we typically have. We have our cars, mass transit, like buses and trains, active travel, and trucks for freight. In the short term, automated cars and trucks will be introduced in the market, and there will be a mix of human-driven and automated vehicles in our transport system. In the medium to long term, human-driven cars and trucks will be replaced by automated versions, and this will probably also happen to mass transit, so buses and trains will be automated as well. Active travel will be safer, with pedestrians and cyclists also enjoying the safety benefits of automated vehicles. And there will likely be an additional component in our future transport system, and this is mobility as a service, or MaaS, which I will talk about more in the next slide. So mobility as a service, or MaaS, combines all the available transport modes, including ride sharing, via a single mobile app. And while this is not yet very common and does not yet include automated vehicles, it's already being adopted in some countries, especially in Europe. So MaaS is a viable alternative to owning a car, as it is convenient and provides a centralized payment system. It can also be cheaper, which is why widespread MaaS adoption will mainly be driven by economics. Now, many of us probably don't realize how much we're spending on the vehicles that we own. So in the most recent Transport Affordability Index published by the Australian Automobile Association, or the AAA, sometime in March this year, the average family in Australia spends $17,464 annually for household transport, and that translates to a national average of about $335 a week. Now, going back to MaaS, if we add automated vehicles and ride sharing in the equation, the cost per kilometer compared to owning a car becomes considerably less. This is because the operating and maintenance costs associated with a vehicle can be spread out to users of the ride sharing service. Now, a Rethink X report states that MaaS, or Transport as a Service, as it's called in their report, will provide 95% of the passenger miles traveled in the US by 2030, and will save an average American family of about $5,600 a year in transportation costs. That is equivalent to a 10% rise. The same report says that in 2021, MaaS will be 4 to 10 times cheaper per mile than buying a new car, and 2 to 4 times cheaper than operating an existing vehicle. Now, this really looks like a very attractive future transport alternative. So again, I ask the question, why are we not considering this as part of our future transport system when developing long-term plans? So how are we traveling so far, Jerome? Got any questions, or do you want me to continue?
I think we can sort of plow on in, but quick question for MaaS. So I know it's merging into the European cities because I have seen it taking place there. Is there anything where it's happening in any Australian cities thus far?
Not that I'm aware of, although I know there's a MaaS Australia. It's an organization. I think they're trying to introduce that system here in Australia, but I'm not sure if there's widespread deployment yet.
And just one last quick question. So who sets the standards? You mentioned how there's going to be a bit of a changing in standards happening. Who sets the sort of standards for planning?
Governments can set standards. There are also some planning bodies that like Austroads, for example, like they set the standards for transport infrastructure, for example. So it's mostly governments and transport authorities that do that.
How much influence does the industry have on them?
I think it has significant influence, but again, it's really just a matter of pushing them to do more and pushing them into action. I think we need to speak a bit more about this issue, because while I know that some governments have already taken this into consideration, there's still a lot of work to be done to actually take into account automated vehicles in the planning process.
All right, so just before we move on, a question here from Miriam. There is a very individualized mindset in Australian meaning. We are not very good at sharing. Do we also need nationalised campaigns about reconnecting with each other through shared small automated transport networks?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Actually, that's one of the policies that needs to be shaped, I think, to be able to promote ride sharing in Australia. I'm going to talk more about ride sharing and future scenarios in the next slides.
That's what I thought. It's a great segue to move on.
Okay, thank you. So now talking about possible future scenarios. So this infographic here is from the ITDP website, and is based on the paper 3 Revolutions in Urban Transportation. It is a very good and simplified summary of the possible transport scenarios that we can expect in any future environment. The business as usual scenario here assumes little change from the 2017 travel patterns and no major transport revolutions occur into the future through to 2050. So this scenario basically assumes that transport technology in the future is the same as it is today, and that by 2050, we'll have 2.1 billion cars all over the world, emitting 4,600 megatons of carbon dioxide. Now, the 2 revolutions or 2R scenario is technology focused, with electric vehicles becoming dominant by 2030 and automated electric vehicles becoming dominant by 2040. While people enjoy electric and automated vehicles in this scenario, the car ownership model doesn't change. So we're still seeing 2.1 billion cars on the road by 2050. Now, on a side note, France and the UK have recently announced that they're planning to ban petrol and diesel and require all vehicles to be fully electric by 2040. So some countries are already moving towards this direction. Now, the third scenario is what the paper calls 3 revolutions or 3R. This means that in addition to vehicles being electric and automated, they are also shared. So this is probably the best scenario that we could hope for, and there's widespread ride sharing and also increased transit performance with on-demand availability. Essentially very similar to the MaaS concept that I spoke about in the previous slide. So all of our mobility requirements can basically be served by just 0.5 billion vehicles on the road. which is around 76% lower than the other two scenarios. Now, it is quite clear that whether it's 2R or 3R, any of these two scenarios will provide significant benefits over the business as usual scenario. It is also very likely that one of these scenarios or a variant of these scenarios is what we'll actually see in the future. Problem is, most of the long-term plans still use BAU as the future scenario. So therefore, transport planning processes need to be updated, not only because the BAU scenario is unlikely to happen, but also because it's the least preferable among the possible scenarios. I believe that it is riskier now to assume a BAU scenario happening in the future than a 2R or 3R scenario happening. So why are we still using a BAU approach in planning? So transport modeling. So one of the main tools we use in the transport planning process are transport models. So for long-term planning and demand forecasting, we use strategic models as it can identify network issues and test future transport initiatives such as infrastructure upgrades. So a typical strategic model inputs and assumptions include future land use projections, capacities of roads and public transport, transport costs and time costs. But one of the more crucial assumptions that I'd like to point out is, which I've already mentioned earlier, is that future transport modes are assumed to be the same as current transport modes. As transport modeling results are used to support future transport investment proposals, that assumption could be very risky given the very fast pace of transport technology development. If we keep on investing to service current modes that could potentially become irrelevant in the future, then we might end up with misallocated investments that could have been used for something else. So I think it's really critical to recognize automated vehicle technology, including MaaS, as an integral part of our future transport system, and then incorporate them in the transport models that we use. Because if we don't, we could be planning for a very different transport ecosystem. The usual problem in our road networks is congestion, which is really just traffic volumes exceeding the road capacity. To demonstrate a potential impact on future infrastructure investment, I'd like to show a typical road upgrade example on how automated vehicles could impact future road network planning. Say we have a link or a corridor in a transport model that has been identified as congested in a future year, with a slow average speed of 15 kilometers per hour in the peak direction. It's been proposed for duplication, and when tested, the peak direction performance improves considerably, bringing back the average speed to free flow conditions at 80 kilometers per hour. Now, some studies have suggested that automated vehicles can increase road capacities significantly because the vehicles can communicate with each other and can therefore travel closely to each other at relatively higher speeds. Now, if we go back to that congestion problem earlier and focus on the peak direction, and let's replace the vehicles with automated ones, the road performance drastically improves and is no longer considered as congested. This is what's likely to happen under the 2R scenario that I spoke about 2 slides back. So it gets even better if we consider ride-sharing as per the 3R scenario. A single ride-sharing vehicle, single ride-sharing automated vehicle can accommodate the mobility needs of multiple people. So assuming that these are single occupant cars, the passengers can comfortably fit in a single autonomous pod or shuttle, freeing up even more road space. Therefore, in the context of this example with automated vehicles, the road duplication, which could cost millions of dollars, by the way, won't be necessary. Now, public transport. Public transport is usually associated with mass transit, such as buses, trains, light rail. With automated vehicles, there is a risk of mass transit being underutilized in the future. Take the case of this very crude and simple example of a home-to-work bus trip. The person walks from the house to the bus stop, then takes the bus and gets off at the nearest bus stop to his office, and then walks to his final destination. That whole trip involves walking, waiting at the bus stop, possibly bus transfers and more bus stops in between the origin and destination. With automated vehicles, this trip can be made door to door, reducing the travel time significantly at a similar or possibly even lower costs. Now, if it was you, which mode would you choose? This is one example of how automated cars could potentially be a threat to future transit patronage. Now, to address this issue and protect public transport investments, governments need to shape policies that will make automated vehicles complement mass transit and not compete with it. So UITP published a policy paper early this year, basically saying that automated vehicles need to be shared fleets that is integrated with public transport. So this one here. It also states that this could only be successful if governments and transport authorities take an active role now and start integrating automated vehicles into an effective public transport network. This image is also from the UITP report showing possible applications of automated vehicles as part of a diversified public transport system. So an example is a first and last mile approach, first and last mile solution to mass transit. Other notable impacts would be on parking and urban planning. With mass and automated vehicles, parking demand would be drastically reduced and parking spaces in CBDs could be moved somewhere else. There was a study done 3 years ago that found that a single shared automated vehicle could potentially eliminate 11 parking spaces. This doesn't necessarily mean that parking will be totally unnecessary in the future, though. The concept of parking could evolve in the future as new opportunities arise. And Lorraine will be talking more about this after my presentation. The way we design or shape our cities will also be influenced by automated vehicles. If we don't have to focus on driving and can do more productive tasks in the car while traveling, then people probably won't mind traveling longer distances. And this could affect people's housing preferences. Living close to the CBD may not necessarily be as attractive as it is today. Existing parking lots or complexes could become redundant, so they could be repurposed into something that provides better amenity to the community, which is again a potentially significant change in the urban landscape. Active travel would also benefit as automated vehicles will create a much safer environment for pedestrians and cyclists. However, there is also a potential risk of people shifting from walking or cycling to the greater convenience of automated vehicles. Again, I'd like to emphasize the need to plan for better integration of the different modes so that automated vehicles and active travel complement each other and not compete. Now, the freight industry needs to consider designing their systems and terminals to accommodate automated vehicles. There is already evidence showing the significant productivity benefits of this technology, such as in automated truck platooning, for example. Automated trucks could in fact be easier to implement as most of the driving tasks are done on highways. So any questions so far? I've got 2 more slides left.
Any questions? We have quite a few, thank you. And just a quick note here, some governments are looking at automated vehicles, cars, as a last mile solution. And so the next one here is from Andrew. Will not the development of the apps come first? That's how Uber got off the ground. The drivers come after that. Development of universal payment system is critical.
Yes, well, that's probably what's going to happen. Or they can be developed concurrently. I mean, the apps I think are a critical part of any mass solution or even a first and last mile solution. But yeah, I think especially first and last mile solutions for mass transit. I think it becomes more attractive if you have that app that could seamlessly collect all of your payments, for example, pick you up from a fixed point or from your doorstep to take you to the train station. So yeah, the development of the app could be done first, or I think it could be done concurrently as well.
I guess the other one is Uber is also acting as a bit of a catalyst for government to do a bit more because they don't want to get Ubered again and being caught flat-footed.
Yeah, that's actually a good example. The market dictating what the government needs to do. So there is actually a good opportunity now to look into the future and then shape policies to steer into that direction to the city's objectives instead of letting the market decide it for you. So I think that that was a good lesson learned with Uber, and I hope that the governments have learned from that and take action now.
Well, and this flows us beautifully into the next question here from Mark. What legislative changes, if any, are anticipated to be required to introduce fully automated vehicles in Australia?
I think you can refer that to the to the NTC paper, but yeah, there's a lot, like, the driver being in control. For example, I think the current legislation requires that a driver is always in control in a vehicle. So I think that part of the legislation needs to be relaxed so that automated vehicles can be introduced to our roads and they can do trials. Yeah, and there's a lot of other legislation in our Australian road rules that it all points to the driver being in control, really. So once that's relaxed, and I think there are guidelines now that's been released by the NTC, so that companies who'd like to innovate can do on-road trials.
We've got a bit of a stream here now around some mass, so I'll delve into this one. This one's from Philip. Isn't it essential to have a common mass standard, at least for Australia, so that all transport services can integrate? At what point should state governments start to collaborate on this question?
Now, yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a standard, not only for mass, but for all automated vehicles. You don't want to be traveling, crossing the border, and then the standards change. So there really needs to be a coordinated collaboration between states, and there should be action from the federal government as well to be able to coordinate all of these nationally.
And then this one here from Christian. How much of the modelling contained in these studies is based on empirical, real-world data?
Not so much. That's I think that's one of the problems why some governments and transport authorities are a bit reluctant to use it in their modeling, because we traditionally use historical data for that, and we don't have historical data for automated vehicles. So the modeling that we would do would be based mainly on assumptions, a lot of assumptions, but these will be assumptions based on studies that have been made. So these are not just wild estimates or wild guesses, but we need to start at some point, and the modeling process will evolve over the years. It's going to be a dynamic process. It's going to change over time while we learn more about automated vehicles.
Right, and this one here, another one from Andrew. Mass vehicles will be different from the cars we drive today. Won't vehicles push to make the ride share a solitary experience?
Not necessarily. I mean, it really depends on what policies government develop. I mean, if you really want to promote ride sharing, then you can make policies to restrict zero occupant vehicles or single occupant vehicles, to discourage people just being alone in their cars. So there really needs to be strong government support for it to be for the mass and ride sharing system to be successful.
And we've got a good one here. It's got quite a few coming through at the moment. So here we go from Scott. How will traditional ownership look in these 3R and 2R scenarios? Surely there will still be those who prefer to own their own car, autonomous or not.
Yes, well, in the 2R scenario, it's the car ownership model doesn't change. So I guess it's people still owning cars, except that they're automated. For the 3R, again, I say it with there needs to be strong government support to promote ride sharing, to make it more attractive for people to ride share and leave their cars at home or not buy a car at all. So to make it really a viable alternative to owning a car, and maybe even develop policies that discourage people from buying their own cars, like additional taxes, for example, or make buying your own automated vehicle quite expensive. So it's better, you're better off just using MaaS.
Okay, just got one quick point and one last question, then we'll sort of move on. And we'll have plenty of time to feed some of these other questions in later on as well, just for those who don't know. So mass ride sharing doesn't always mean door-to-door. It means multi-pickups and drops, unknown times with strangers. Public transport would be more of a reliable journey. Just a comment from Gary. And last one here from Yash. How do you see the transition working between partial autonomy and full autonomous and non-autonomous vehicle?
Yeah, that's a good question. The transition is actually going to be, I believe, is going to be the trickiest part. Our discussions usually revolve around, the ultimate future scenario where everything's automated, but the transition is really going to be quite difficult when automated vehicles and manually driven vehicles interact with each other. So I think the transition is bound to happen, and I think government needs to plan for that as well, not just the ultimate scenario. Although having said that, there are car companies. I think Ford is going to jump from, it's not going through level 3 or level 4 anymore. They're going straight to level 5. I think there are some companies car companies that think the transition from partial to fully automated is quite dangerous, especially when the human needs to take over control of the vehicle. So it's going to be interesting in the next few years what actually happens and what how the industry responds to this.
All right, thanks, Jerome. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So the following are ADVI's key position points, which is also outlined in the thought leadership paper. So the first is that governments should adopt a nationally coordinated approach to future transport system planning that includes automated vehicles, and I mentioned this earlier. ADVI proposes that the Council of Australian Governments set out a national agenda that ensures automated vehicle implications are included in integrated transport and land use strategies. Secondly, assumptions and parameters used in transport planning must be updated. These impact the demand forecasts used as the basis for future transport investments. So it is crucial that the assumptions and input parameters that we use are not outdated to avoid gross inaccuracies which could ultimately lead to wrong policy decisions. And lastly, new mobility ecosystems need to be integrated with transport planning. So just to summarize, it needs to be recognized that automated vehicles will not only change the way we travel, but also the way we live. So governments will play a vital role in shaping policies that maximize the benefits of automated technology. So as governments develop long-term urban transport and development plans, it is imperative that they understand the impacts of automated vehicles on the future transport and social environment. Now, how transportation networks and systems are going to look like in the decades ahead are influenced by the decisions being made today. So if driverless technology is not considered in these decisions, it could have far-reaching and costly consequences as a result. So we really need to think hard about how we plan for our future transport systems. And one of the more critical steps is to prioritize the review of current transport planning practices and processes. I know that there's still a lot of uncertainty given that the technology is still new, but we all need to start acting now to ensure that our long-term planning processes prepare us for the most likely future transport scenario. And that's it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks, Jerome. Whilst we're just changing presenters, I've just got two questions for you. One here from Ben. My question is, how do we quantify accurately the impact of driverless vehicles on the road network and thus the need to upgrade the road network?
Quantify accurately? Well, I'm not sure how accurately we can quantify it now, given like what I mentioned earlier, we don't have empirical or historical data, but we can use assumptions, educated guesses, if you will, to give us a good understanding of how it will impact the future road network performance. Like that example that I gave earlier. There are studies that say that capacity could improve to 100, 200, sometimes even 300%. So you're basically doubling or tripling the capacity of your current road network. So even if we continue to have the same car ownership model and we'll have the same demand projections in the future, our road network would work more efficiently. So congestion may not necessarily be a problem.
And that sort of draws on the one that Phil had, because he was sort of drawing on, talking about the congestion and how we might see some movements of vehicles. But we'll hold Phil's over to after we've heard from Lorraine. So welcome, Lorraine.
Thanks, Jerome, and thank you, Jerome, for your presentation. It was really informative. Okay, so we might get started. Again, thank you for giving Parking Australia the opportunity to speak. And our presentation, I think my presentation is going to fit in quite well with Jerome's, and we're certainly going to be able to cover off on a few things together. I'm going to go right the way through the presentation, so I won't pause for questions. We can actually do that at the end, if that's okay with you, Jerome. So Parking Australia is delighted to be able to share its thoughts on the journey to the driverless world. Just on a year ago, Parking Australia and ADVI held a city forum in Perth. It was probably the first one, I think, that ADVI had held. The session was facilitated by Peter Damon and was based on a hypothetical. He played a great role, so he put us in the position of the year 2025. And what would the parking industry look like at that stage? What, at that time, had we learnt on the path of our journey through the driverless vehicle initiative, and then what had happened over the years, and how prepared were the parking industry for those changes? What was glaringly apparent at that time, with the mix of delegates from the various sectors from parking in the room, was that it as an industry, we really weren't that prepared. And on a whole, and obviously listening with Jerome as well, we weren't engaging with various stakeholders and weren't having too much dialogue about driverless vehicles. So at that time, we decided that we'd form a future of parking committee that could oversee and really cut through some of the many messages and research and opinions that are being made about the parking industry and driverless vehicles and autonomous vehicles. So when we look at this topic, we need to be fairly broad. There's lots of aspects and challenges and processes that need to be explored. However, we can certainly discuss that offline. But for today, we've got about 20 minutes just to see where the parking industry is positioned at the moment in the transport discussion and where it could be potentially in the next 10 to 20 years. What's clear, however, is that the future for parking is not about the death of parking. It's certainly about the opportunities for those that are going to embrace it and diversify. So I think it's really interesting, isn't it, when we look at history and we look back at how we've come through the transport planning and how we've come through our transport modelling and various forms of transport to where we are today and draw some of those synergies. So I'm going to wind the clock back for a couple of slides, and we're going to go back to the 1930s, and we're going to have a look about the transition from horse and cart to actual vehicles. So imagine the plight of the urban planner in the 1930s. Gone are the horse and carts, and the transport of the cars was for the rich, is now for everybody. Streets were designed for horses and buggies, now need to transport hundreds of cars and at a faster speed. It was certainly a really big shift from the horse manure to the car smog. And even though the cities were early adopters, farms and regions, and take that into account, farms, regions, some of the suburbs were quite a few years behind, still relying on horse-drawn carts. The car propaganda portrayed the horse as an untamable beast and author of many, many and frightful accidents. At the same time, motor enthusiasts rallied against regulations, speed limits and licensing requirements for this new style of transport. However, what was becoming more and more evident with this new form of transport was that parking was becoming an issue, especially for storekeepers, for people that obviously were trying to run a business. with people parking out the front of their business, and for many hours at a time, and that certainly was workers, and I'm sure we can draw those analogies even up to today. A very famous politician at the time in his area, a man called Carl McGee, was so frustrated with the parking situation that he decided he'd put out a contest to try and get a device so that parking could be measured and monitored and also enforced, of course. His invention, which you can see on the right-hand side there, caught on very quickly. The retailers loved meters. It encouraged a quick turnover of cars and potential customers, and drivers were forced to accept them as a practical necessity for regulating parking. McGee's brainwave was to install this device that had a coin acceptor and dial to engage a timing mechanism. The pointer and flag indicated the expiration of the parking period, meaning you either had to move on, put more money in, or you'd be faced with an enforcement or a fine. So not too much has changed today. Obviously the techniques have, but that method was still in practice for about 40 years. So those meters were still there for that time. And of course, the very important part for our local councils is certainly the amount of revenue that's generated. As you can see there in the States by 1944, it was about 10 million annually was being generated from parking. So what about Australia? By the middle of the 20s, car parking had become a serious problem, certainly in Sydney and Brisbane. The Lord Mayor in Brisbane at the time, William Jolly, addressed the problem at the Motor Trades Association in 1925 and said something had to be done about it. And we know Brisbane and the Gold Coast have had a variety of different types of meters. In the 1940s, we saw the shopping malls start to evolve, and in the 50s, Brisbane, which would transform parking for Queensland with the arrival of the shopping mall and also the multi-level car park. As you can see there, the first rooftop car park on the RACQ building at Fortitude Valley was certainly one of its kind, and for those of you that may remember the Amoco petrol. So off-street parking was very popular. We continued to park on-street, be enforced, and off-street parking and private operators such as Secure and Wilson were certainly coming to the fore. Let's look now at the transport planning in the 50s, and we've got a quote up there from Melbourne Transport Planning Scheme, but this was fairly evident nationally as Australia started to plan its post-World War land use, and we focused very heavily on motor vehicles as the dominant mode of transport. And certainly to Jerome's point, it's about us thinking today, and once we start to talk about driverless vehicles and parking, we need to look at driverless vehicles, as we did in the 50s. We very focused on the car, and the car was evident certainly in the outer suburbs where people were transit poor and they relied on cars for everything relating to their commuting. So as we can see, there's been certainly a big emphasis in the 50s and 60s based on that American land use transport modelling around being accessibility by car, minimising congestion, and then adjusting those land use patterns. The budgets were very heavily on road and parking itself obviously generating a lot of revenue. So where have we seen parking placed in the transport discussion over time? It has been a significant revenue generator, but in many ways it's been a passive element of the planned transport system. Parking sits across many sectors, as you can see there from our icons, and it's generally just part of the offering of sometimes larger systems. It's part of the airport, it's part of the hospital or the university. It is an enabler that facilitates other services. So let's explore how driverless vehicles and technology will be the enablers now and take parking from its silo to be part of the discussion on mobility as a service. And we heard Jerome talk about this quite at length, and parking is becoming a very big part of that mobility as a service. You know, I've been to quite a few different conferences on driverless vehicles and intelligent transport, and sometimes parking does get left out of that equation, and it's certainly not thought about as much in the mass discussion as probably it should be. And therefore, mass can help with parking to be a facilitator of that better parking experience, helping with direction, availability, locations and pricing of parking, as well as deliver a host of other key services. The Parking Australia Future Parking Committee has been working on a document relating to some of the impacts of driverless vehicles, taking into consideration parking supply, demand, parking management, and physical requirements. So this is a fairly rough draft of that matrix that we've been working on. So we're looking at the possible impact on the parking industry by areas of possible change. So at the top of the matrix here, we can see the change from petrol cars, where we are at the moment, so business today, through to vehicle movement on roads, vehicle parking, so where the change from the driver making the decisions to where the driver may not be present, and also putting into the matrix in the discussion the ownership model and the ownership structure. Then we're obviously looking at how this is impact on parking supply, demand, the management of those parking facilities and the physical requirements. And interestingly, of the 16 indicators, 14 of those may have an impact on the parking industry with driverless vehicles over time. This, of course, takes into account the full journey to fully autonomous vehicles. However, for us, it's an excellent high-level observation of areas that as the parking industry we should be starting to work on, and we are already, and ways we can facilitate preparedness and discussion with our members. The today impacts are those which relate to electric vehicles and the ability for our on-street and off-street planning and policy, and what's expected to increase in the next 5 years around at least electric vehicles. Note through the matrix, you can see there the word could, as our cut through all of this literature is about providing the best guidance and assumptions that we can through our own dedicated parking research, either through our own association or through our colleagues overseas. So we're going to explore some of these indicators on the matrix in our current slides here, starting with the electric vehicles. So the opportunities for the parking operators now with electric vehicles, and I think we could certainly, that's a whole nother webinar when we start to talk about the uptake of electric vehicles, but they're being highly considered in federal governments, especially in the smart cities programs, as it's about how we move better and advance mobility solutions and the enablers to the adoption of these. The connected electric autonomous vehicles provide a significant opportunity for most sectors of the parking industry. So in this slide, we can see here we've got 30-minute charging, 4 to 8 hours, and then the 8+. If we recall our matrix, we can have the opportunity to deliver 15-minute parking with charging. So either on-street or off-street, 15-minute parking can start to offer charging with plenty of opportunities. Off-street parking operators may be able to restructure express or ride-hailing services using charging as a facility, as well as shopping centres for quick drop-off, picking up groceries, and then charger vehicles. At the 4 to 8 hour charge, we can see commuters, off-street parking, hospital staff, airports, and for longer charges, we can see overnight charging hubs for car sharing, long-term airports, and universities. So plenty of opportunities in the today. Like anything, it's a demand and supply. As electric vehicles become more affordable, then certainly there are opportunities in this space. But it's also about governments and operators working together, be it on-street or off-street, to facilitate this as well. We need to be very mindful that when electric vehicles do start, and it's not actually when, it's actually now, that we need to be prepared for that. How prepared are we at the moment? Let's look at some more of the parking opportunities around that matrix of parking and supply. If parking becomes a potential hub in the city for couriers, collection points, and city parking is reduced or repurposed, then additional parking may be required in the suburbs for, I think as Jerome had mentioned it before, freight or couriers, providing collection hubs, transit centres, and parking may well become a centre of service activities. So there's going to be some real opportunities for parking operators and parking potential, not necessarily as we refit or redesign parking in the cities, but also if we're looking at where the hubs are going to be in our suburbs and regions. The role of maths, and that's a really important part, and it's certainly a discussion for us. We do have Andrew Summers from Maths who's speaking at our conference in September. So it's something that we're very alert to. And our operators, I think one of the questions was around how engaged are we at the moment with maths in Australia. I know from a parking perspective, we have quite a few of our members that are working in that space now, looking at the aggregation. And the important thing at the moment is there are, and we talked about apps in the question section, there are a lot of parking apps. And we have to be very mindful that as drivers, whether it's a connected vehicle or even at today, we don't want to be driving around with 72 apps on our phone. Aggregation and the ability for maths to work more seamlessly now and in the future is very important. And it's very in relation to where the accommodation industry was probably 3 or 4 or even 5 years ago, where the industry needed to aggregate and get the data and real life data about room availability as we do parking availability, because at the moment we don't have that live parking availability, whether it's on street or off. So we've heard about Jerome talking about maths, and parking, yes, is certainly alert to that. We need to be really mindful that the 18 to 24-year-old demographic will take up about 50% of the urban workforce by 2025. And this demographic is used to planning on the run, and they are the drivers of the sharing economy. By 2025, it's estimated that about 50% of this demographic will be wanting to use one app to make their transport decisions. And for those who are parking on or off street, will need to aggregate into that one platform, be able to provide availability, payment, and other services, as well as the opportunity for, say, augmented reality advertising, wayfinding, promotions, or even health messaging. So designing the car park of the future and obviously refitting the car park of today. As we evolve through the various stages of our matrix, a couple of slides back, from electric cars through to the various stages of driverless vehicles, parking will need to adapt and provide specific levels of parking. Some may decide that they don't want to move through those stages. When I say some, I say operators and councils, wherever that may be, and only opt to cater for the cars of today, with others offering the full suite of parking types. Once at the fully autonomous level, we'll then see a new era of parking service centres that are meeting places for all types of charging and stopping as energy and data storage centres. Let's see what that could look like. This is courtesy of Amy Court, as a Boston architectural firm called Arrow Street, and it provides a support of the type of transition that may happen. It's a bit like for us now going from, say, 2, 3 to 4G in our phones. Some parking services over time will switch off as the new ones and demand for new ones are fulfilled. So the first phase of this is 2018 to 25. Because self-driving cars are predicted to be more precise parkers than us humans, cars will require only as much as about 4 or 5 inches of parking space at either side. Court believes that this could reduce the space of a car space by many metres, freeing up entire floors of parking structures that could be well reclaimed for other activities such as residential hotels, offices and retail. This of course may not be suitable for refits, as where the cars are parked close together may not have any impact, especially where there are columns positioned closely together. So in this model, we can see that the top level is for driverless and connected vehicles. The second level down has higher floor heights, so it's going to be adapted for other uses, so for offices, for retail. The third floor has energy harvesting speed humps, which we'll also see a little bit in the further slides about how we can use parking facilities for certainly generating energy. Fourth floor is a walk-up and accessible floor, and the ground floor houses the traditional driving vehicles that aren't connected. The skins of the wall of the car park provide a display for augmented reality projections. The second phase is when we're into autonomous vehicles fully. We're in 2025 and 2035. And as we see self-driving cars increase their presence in the market, people may change the way they think about their car ownership. And certainly we'll see that evolving, and we are now. And that's a huge question. And I think certainly for us in the parking industry is really where that's going to take us. Public sharing services like the Uber style model may become certainly more popular. Floors are refitted for other uses. We see there that drones have a floor where there can be drop-offs. Great opportunity for the parking industry. Public spaces and gardens fill the roof of the car park, which are solar or any other power generating, and charging floors and specific vehicle retrieving floors are the norms. And certainly today, when we start to look for the next 5 to 10 years, a very key important point is as cars start to become self-parking, we need to consider those floors of retrieval. What happens when people are all of a sudden out of their car, calling their car? Where do we put the pedestrians and the people that are actually waiting for their vehicles to arrive? Now, whether that's on street or off street, certainly some considerations for our planning. When we start to look at refitting current parking facilities off-street, we can look at those in a variety of ways. Where possible, refitting of parking facilities may occur. If not used as transit hubs, then service centres for pickups for those drones. Collections, as with the advent of online shopping, drones may need to have centralised shopping and collection points. And a great focus on our health due to our well-being, being more sedentary, and hopefully we'll be getting away from our desks. We'll see car parks transformed undercover as maybe sports centres, and certainly indoor undercover sports centres. Parking may well become a hub of energy storage, transit service, work and play. At a recent international parking conference, a virtual reality presentation of a car park of the future, which is the one on the right side, was demonstrated. I actually have that on a video, which I'm more than happy to share. However, it was quite large for this presentation, so if you do want it, we'll be able to email it to you afterwards. But it was really about the opportunity for new and retrofitting of car parks used through a modular system that's linked together to allow for stacking and manoeuvring on floors. And certainly stacking of car parks is not new. I mean, it goes back years. However, this is a modular system, not an expensive system, and certainly can help refit existing car parks that are able to do so. The system could be applied across a range of parking, and also we'll see parking facility as that centre of energy storage, transit service, a place where you can work and play. And on the left-hand side there you can see how that garage, or that's obviously that parking garage, can be used for a variety of things. The modular system stacks together and can be used in residential, it can be used in retail, and across quite a variety of sectors. Car parking is and will no longer be about the beginning and the end of the journey. It certainly will be about part of the journey. If we look at parking and the technology ecosystem currently, which is on the left-hand side there, what you'll see are a whole range of suppliers that are currently in the market. The hardware suppliers, the software suppliers, parking management solutions, and obviously then the end users, be it the driver or the parking operator on or off street. Those current suppliers, and many of them today, are certainly working in that space on the right-hand side. But again, this is where the opportunity and the diversifications will happen. Our operators and our parking suppliers on the left need to start to work with the technology providers, the telephony and data providers who will be working in that driverless and autonomous and MAS space of the future. Certainly, one of the most important parts for the parking industry is really about one key factor, and for us it's certainly a discussion that's happening in our Future Parking Committee, and that's really around car ownership, and Jerome spoke to that earlier. The industry needs to keep alert to the 18, 24-year-olds of 2025 who are the ones that are going to be making those decisions on the run. Probably not owning a car, but using their car and car sharing services for different purposes. And finally, I suppose for the parking industry, it's really going to be a turnaround in some ways for that Joni Mitchell song, for those of you that do know it, the Big Yellow Taxi, where we certainly won't be paving paradise to put up a parking lot, but we'll be paving a car park to reinstate paradise. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. I think you're making sure, or you're really seeking out to ensure that our parking industry doesn't go down the Kodak line, so it's fantastic to see.
Exactly. Thanks, Jerome.
No worries. Got a couple of questions here. First of all, good one here from Miriam, and I guess it's maybe looking at the adaptability of you guys in the future. So parking of automated trucks into city zones. At the moment, inner city car parking is precarious for deliveries. Thoughts?
Well, certainly that's where we would be looking at those regional hubs, and you're quite right. I mean, even as today, we try to do a lot of work with getting cars off the street, and couriers and trucks off the street. The challenge is the heights of the car parks, and that's not going to change to a degree with our current parking situation. However, that's where we would see that there'll be those regional hubs where autonomous trucks can park, and whether then drones will take some of the deliveries, or the autonomous pods or buses that we're seeing will then bring those into the city.
Fantastic. I think this is really looking at the practical side of things. And it's combining a question from Phil and from Andrew. So I guess in looking at the movements due to combination of employers, vehicles, etc., a lot of new users, so the potential for threatening all of the claims in regards to reducing vehicles due to empty vehicles moving around the place. And then sort of drawing that a little bit further, I guess, talking about the parking area, tradesmen will be an issue as they need to carry their tools, so supplying parking for them.
Yeah, and you're quite right, and that's going on, I think, from the previous question. That's where there is an opportunity for parking. So at autonomous vehicles, and I think we had a brief discussion about it yesterday, we're in that mode where we think, what do we do with the things that are in the boot of our car? I have no doubt that we will redesign and reposition ourselves to know what we'll be doing those, and it may well be that there's storage facilities in parking lots now. Certainly those off-street car parks are going to become hubs. They're going to be hubs for a whole lot of services, and certainly if that means for storage facilities, then that's a great solution. But for tradespeople, getting the tradespeople, I think, off the street, and what we will see with autonomous vehicles ideally is that we will be getting them off the street, because there is an opportunity for congestion, and it's one of those unknowns. We don't know whether people are going to be just dropped out the front of places, which like taxis are now, and it's about regulation. We need to make sure that if people are driving in autonomous vehicles around the street, that there are great drop-off zones, and that's a lot about planning for the future.
And I guess, and this is a great sort of question to close ourselves out with, from Christian. I apologise to those others who haven't had a chance to get to the question. What is Parking Australia suggesting government should be doing to help the parking industry prepare itself for advanced transport systems such as CEVs and MAS?
Yeah, great question, Christian. It's something that we're working on, and we will continue to work on with government. And it is certainly around helping them prepare with that technology, vehicle-to-vehicle technology, and understanding that it is a huge evolution for the parking industry. It's a huge evolution, game changer for the vehicle industry, but certainly the governments, be it state and federal governments, need to ensure that they are working with us, and we are. I won't say that we're not, but certainly be able to, for the operators on and off street, to understand how that technology can aggregate with the various systems in the transport and transport planning. So great question.
I know. And I do apologise that we have to sort of close it off now. I've got a couple more here, unfortunately, but won't have time. One quick question for you, though, Lorraine. Where's your conference? Because a couple of people have asked for that.
Yeah, the conference is at the start this year, the Outlook Conference, and as I said, we do have a really good session on driverless vehicles. I'll give my little plug here, but we've got some great case studies, and I think Jerome did mention earlier that New South Wales has just launched their pod, their bus, which they're doing some trials in at Sydney Olympic Park. And we'll have Curtin University talking about their driverless experience. They've launched their driverless pod at Curtin University, so they'll be doing a case study. Driverless vehicles will be featuring heavily at our conference at the Star in September.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Thank you very much, Jerome. It's been a fantastic session. And I'll pass back to Rosemary.
Awesome. And any more questions, please send them through to me and I'll forward them on. And thank you very much. It's been fantastic, everybody. And please take a minute to fill out our survey that will launch shortly.